Hello, my name is Meg Krase. I'm the social worker here at the Carpentersville Police Department. I run a couple of different programs here at the police department, but one of which is my Family Matters series. The following is going to be a session of my Family Matters series regarding challenging behaviors. Generally, in this presentation, we're going to focus sort of on that middle school age, but a lot of this can apply both younger and older. As always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I work here at the police department. You can call up to the police department at 847 551 3481, or my email address is on our website. It is, often posted on Facebook. Any way that you need to, please feel free to get hold of me with any questions. So first we're going to talk about a little bit about brain development and what's sort of going on in these preteen teen years. So when we talk about brain development, the brain develops in the back of the brain. The front of the part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex. This is the last part to change. The prefrontal cortex is the decision-making part of the brain. It's responsible for your child's ability to plan, to think about consequences of actions, to solve problems, to control impulses. Sort of these really big things that we want kids to be able to do is the last part of the brain that develops. This usually changes into early adulthood, those sort of later 18s, 20s, that kind of area. A lot of the changes in the brain changes in the brain during the teen years. The main change is that the unused connections in thinking and processing part of your child's brain, it's called the gray matter, are sort of pruned away. At the same time, other connections are really strengthened. This is the brain's way of becoming more efficient and sort of based on that use it or lose it principle. Okay, because the prefrontal cortex is still developing, teenagers might rely on a part of the brain called the amygdala to make decisions and to solve problems more than adults do. So the amygdala is associated with emotions, impulses, aggression, and instinctive behavior. So it's not that reasoning and that control part of your brain, but sort of that impulsive, more aggressive, more emotional part of your brain. So let's see how this plays into behaviors. So we want to talk about the ABCs of behaviors. The antecedents, which was the preceding factors that make behavior more or less likely to occur. Another more familiar term for this is triggers. So learning and anticipating the antecedents is extremely helpful in preventing misbehavior. Okay, then we talk about the B in the ABCs, which is the behavior itself, the specific actions you are trying to encourage or discourage. C, we talk about the consequences, the results that naturally or logically follow a behavior. Consequences, both either positive or negative, affect the likelihood of a behavior reoccurring, and the more immediate the consequences, the more powerful it is. So let's talk more about the antecedents. There are some of them that we want to embrace that we think are a good thing. Here's some of them that we can bolster good behavior with. So we want to be aware of the situation. We want to consider and manage the environmental and emotional factors, sort of hunger, fatigue, anxiety, or distractions that we can make it much more difficult for children to rein in their behavior. A lot of these make it more difficult for adults to rein in their behavior, okay? Adjust the environment. When it's homework time, for instance, remove distraction like video screens, toys. Well, I can't really do video screens right now with e-learning, but TV on in the background, toys. By providing a snack, not that, as we all talk about, that hangry. You want to establish an organized place for kids to work and make sure the schedule has some breaks built into it. Attention is not infinite for children. We want to make sure that expectations are clear. You'll get better cooperation if both you and your child are clear on what's expected. Sit down with him or her and present the information verbally. Even if you think that they should know what's expected, clarifying expectations at the outset of a task helps to sort of head off those misunderstandings down the road. Okay? Provide countdowns for transitions. So when possible, prepare children for an upcoming transition. Let them know when there are, say, 10 minutes remaining before they must come to dinner or start their homework. Then remind them when there are, let's say, 2 minutes left. It's just as important as issuing a countdown is actually making the transition at the time that you said you were going to make it. So 10 minutes needs to mean 10 minutes. Let the kids have a choice. As kids growing up, it's important that they have a say in their own scheduling. Giving a structured choice, do you want to take a shower before dinner or after dinner, can help them feel empowered and encouraged to let them be more self-regulating. So in going back a little bit to talk about to being aware of this situation, for one example of this, my son, when he was only a few years old, had an issue with hitting at daycare. This happened when, it's happened many times before I thought to ask the daycare provider what was happening right before he was hitting. It turns out when I asked the question that he was hitting the same little girl, and the little girl would get in his face about something, screaming, yelling, would be sort of, as we call it, in his personal bubble. Okay. And he would hit her. Knowing this information did not change that he should not hit her, but it did change the conversation I had with him about it. I needed to know, is he hitting just to hit, or is he hitting because the child was in his space and he needed to use his words to get her out of his space? Knowing this information changed my response to this situation. So again, being aware of what's going on. Are they hungry? Are they tired? What distractions are in place? Are all very important key parts of understanding a child's behavior. All right, so things you want to avoid. You want to avoid that assuming that expectations are understood. Don't assume that kids know what's expected of them. Spell it out for them. Demands change from situation to situation, and when children are unsure of what they're supposed to be doing, they're more likely to misbehave. You know, that bored kid in class who just needs something to do, needs to know what's expected of them. Avoid calling things out from a distance. Be sure to tell children important instructions face to face. Things yelled from a distance are less likely to be remembered and understood. They're more likely to be misunderstood. Avoid transitioning without a warning. We talked before about how important it is to have those transitions. Transitions can be really hard for kids, especially in the middle of something that they're enjoying. Having a warning gives children the chance to find a good stopping place for an activity and make the transition less fraught. Don't get me wrong, it's still not easy, but having this warning lets them in their mind know that it's coming. Asking rapid fire questions or giving a series of instructions. Delivering a series of questions or instructions at children limits the likelihood that they will answer questions, remember the tasks, and do what they've been instructed to do. Okay, if you count 1 to 10, these are the steps I want you to take. It's likely that step 3 or 4 is probably going to get missed because there's too much going on for them. Okay, so we want to talk about actual behavior. So these behaviors that we are talking about should be specific so that everyone is clear on what's expected. They should be observable, so something that you can see or know. They should be measurable, so everyone can agree on whether or not the behavior happens. An example of a poorly defined behavior is acting up or being good. So telling our kids, don't act up. Well, what does that mean? Okay, a well-defined behavior would be, coming home past curfew is bad, or starting homework on time is a good thing. As parents, we often take for granted that our kids know what we expect of them. They are not mind readers. We need to make sure that we are clear and specific and concise on what is expected and what is not expected. All right, so then we start to talk a little bit about consequences. We want to make sure that we're clear on the consequences. We want to establish which behaviors will result in consequences. When a child exhibits that behavior, make sure the corresponding consequence immediately follows the negative behavior. Okay, so I know that we're focusing sort of on middle school and that preteen era, but it's also important, this is very important for little kids as well. The consequence has to happen immediately. If I punish my child for something that they did at daycare, if I give my son a timeout for something he did at daycare 4 hours later, it doesn't mean anything. It needs to follow directly after the bad behavior so that they know what it's related to. Okay. We want to make sure that we're being consistent. If we randomly are administering consequences when you're feeling frustrated, it undermines the system and makes it harder for the child to connect the behavior with the consequences. So at my house, if my son's not going to eat dinner, that's fine. That's a choice he's making, but he's not going to sit there and whine about it. If I let him whine about it on Monday and then on Tuesday I say, nope, you have to go to your room for whining, it doesn't make sense to him because he was allowed to do it the day before. So why is it an issue now? So it needs to be consistent. Okay, we need to set rules and follow them. Even when it's inconvenient for you as the parent, you need to follow through. Do not make threats of punishments if you are not going to follow through. If you say, if you don't clean this up, I will put your toys in the trash. If you say that, you need to be prepared to actually throw their toys in the trash, or it is a meaningless threat. Okay, Or if you're out as socially, at a family friend's house, anything like that, and you say, hey, if you keep acting up, which again is a bad example of a behavior, we will leave. You need to be prepared to leave if you say this. If you do not actually want to leave, don't say this, because your child's going to learn that you're not going to follow through on the consequences. Okay, very important, return to the task. If a consequence was issued for not complying with a task, once the consequence ends, the child should be instructed to complete the original task. This way, kids won't begin to see this as an escape strategy. Especially, I see this as really important when it comes to things like homework, chores, things like that. If they get in trouble for not taking out the garbage, say they get sent to their room for a little bit, then when they come out, they need to take out that garbage. If they just then go on watching TV or something, they see that, oh, I didn't actually have to do it. I can go sit in my room for a little bit. So we need to make sure that they return to the task at hand. I put a little quote up at the top because I like it. You're free to make your choices, but you're not free to choose the consequences for your choices. So next we're going to go into a little bit more about consequences. So when we talk about natural consequences are the inevitable result of a child's own actions. For example, despite Dad's urging him to put his coat on, Tommy goes outside when it's cold without wearing a coat. So naturally, Tommy's going to deal with the consequence of that. He's going to be cold because he did not listen to Dad. Okay, a logical consequence happens when a result is a result of a child's action, but are imposed by the parent or caregiver. For example, 12-year-old Sandy left the house in the middle of the night using her bedroom window without permission. So mom took her bedroom door off. Logical consequences are most useful when a child's action could result in harm to the child, such as leaving in the middle of the night. It's important to make sure that logical consequences are reasonable and related to the problem. If Sandy left the house without permission and mom took away TV time, the consequence does not fit with the problem behavior. Consequences need to go hand in hand with the bad behavior to teach a lesson. For example, Sandy lost her mother's trust by leaving without permission, so now she's not trusted to be alone in her room, i.e., they took out the door. Whether it's a natural or a logical consequence, it's important to have a conversation as to why the consequence happened and what could be done differently in the future to avoid the consequence. I realize, these are kids. We think that they don't understand. We need to sit down and talk to our kids calmly and clearly about set expectations, even after a consequence. The consequence is closely tied to the behavior. It gives the child a chance to learn what happens when he doesn't behave in the way that you expect him to behave. It separates the deed from the doer and does not shame or punish the child. It's concerned with the present future behavior and helps the child learn to be responsible for their own actions. The consequence is done in a calm environment. It lets the child make a choice, between the behavior and the consequence while they can be effective. The parent must be able to think ahead and come up with a proper response. The parent must not step in to save the child. The child must be allowed to experience the consequence, and consequences take time to put into action and often does not work the first time. So if we're going back to Tommy and his coat with that, Dad needs to step in and not save him. You chose not to listen to me. So obviously within reason. Again, going back to the logical, needs to step in if there's any harm that could result from the action, okay? They need to experience it. Again, doesn't have to be for a super extended period of time, but they need to see why they need to listen, okay? And it often doesn't work the first time. You may do these natural consequences. It takes a while, okay? Common mistakes for parents. So when we're talking about common mistakes, there's 3 real common mistakes. The escalation trap. It can be one of 2 ways. A child throws a fit until a parent gives in, or the parent has to ask 5 or so times before the child listens. So an example of that, a child begs and asks over and over to go to a friend's house. Eventually the child annoys the parent enough that the parent says, yeah, fine, okay, go. The child has just learned that if they ask over and over, they'll eventually get their way. In the second example of the escalation trap, the parent has to ask 5 times before the child listens. Sometimes it's a child teaching a parent that you will only respond after the parent escalates. So the classic example is when you say, okay, kids, it's time to wash up for dinner. They're watching TV and they do nothing. So a few minutes later, you come back and say a little louder, I said it's time to come in for dinner. Maybe they say, oh, okay, in a few minutes, we're coming, all that. Have a bunch of excuses. But a few minutes later, they're still not at the dinner table. The third time, you're visibly angry. You order them to come to dinner, probably shouting, and that's when they finally come in. They've now learned that they don't really have to come in until you raise your voice. Okay? With both of these examples, it's important to stick with what you said. You said no, the answer is no. You said come, the answer is come. Okay? If this is already a problem, it can be hard to change. The only way to change it is to stick with what you've said. Have a conversation with your child about how things are going to be changed. Use positive reinforcement as the change occurs. The danger here, so then we go on to the next, which is the next trap, which is this is just a phase trap. Thinking that all behavior is just a phase and it'll pass without work or effort. A lot of this takes time and a lot of communication. The last trap is the you do this on purpose. Thinking that their behavior is something that is done intentionally to annoy you or tax you as the parent. The danger here is that if you think that your child is doing something intentionally to bother you or hurt you, you're going to respond a lot differently than if you see it's a behavior that has nothing to do with you as a person. If you think that the behavior is intended to push your buttons, you're more likely to respond with a negative emotion rather than responding in a calm way and thinking about how to discourage the behavior in the future or to support your child through difficult tasks. It will also be harder to praise the behaviors you do want to see if you're angry at your child. So don't get me wrong, every parent loses their cool every once in a while, but we have to assess to what degree you're losing your cool, number one, and number two, to taking yourself out of the situation, knowing that kids make mistakes, they're going to have bad behaviors, and it's not a personal attack against you. Consequences are used to address the behavior, not to get even with your child. Okay? Positive attention. No matter the age, letting kids know that you appreciate their behavior will make them feel good. And when they know exactly what they're being praised for, they're more likely to do it again in the future. I really like positive attention for what I consider sort of mild bad behavior. If a child is behaving in a way that is unsafe to themselves or others, then of course an adult should intervene. Otherwise, do your best to ignore the behavior and try to provide positive attention when they stop. Child behavior experts call this as sort of active ignoring. By withdrawing your attention, you're sending the message that acting out is not the way for them to get what they want. You reinforce this message when, as soon as you see them calming themselves down or obeying an instruction, you give them your attention. So again, we go back to that situation of the child asking over and over and over to go to their friend's house. As a parent, I would actively ignore that. They're not in danger. It's not harm to themselves. They're just sort of begging and quite honestly annoying me. So as a parent, I would just ignore it. And when it stops, and when they stop bringing it up and sort of get into their head that I said no, I would say, hey, I appreciate that you stopped whining. Let's do something, give some sort of positive attention from that. Let's watch a movie together. Or if you don't have time for that, just praise them for, hey, I appreciate that you stopped whining. And actually mean it not in a sarcastic way. Okay. One big thing that I see very commonly with parents is say what you mean and mean what you say. You establish trust by following through on what you say. Provide consistency and expectations and teach commitment and offer clarity. Knowing the warning signs that your child's getting escalated. Disengage from the conversation when the warning signs appear and take a break. Prompt your child to take a break. Practice their coping skills. If you guys are arguing, they need to be able to deal with that. You may have to leave the situation. If your kid just keeps trying to push you when you're angry and this conversation is just escalating, and may say, hey, we need to take a break. I know I said that consequences have to immediately follow, but it needs to be clear and collected and have a conversation with it as well. If you're trying to engage your child and they're just at that breaking point and they're just, retreating to their room, sometimes it is better to avoid following your child if they need to take a break. They need to recognize how to deal with their own emotions because, again, with that brain development, they're still trying to figure all of that out. So it may be, okay, we need to take time out for a couple minutes, everybody calm down, and then we come back to the table, we have this conversation, and then we return to whatever task it was. Okay, you can always return to the conversation later. You do not address things with your youth when they're extremely upset, they're violent, or they're under the influence. So we need to take care of ourselves as parents. When you take off on a plane, a flight attendant explains to you how to use the oxygen masks, right? We've seen this in person, we've seen this in movies. They tell the passengers to put their own masks on before helping anyone else, including their children. This is the same when you are dealing with mental health, challenging behaviors, anything like that. Parents and caregivers must make sure that they have resolved their own emotion before addressing their concerns with their child. Consequences should be a direct response to an action or an inaction. They should not be put in place to get even with the child. So when we talk about taking care of yourselves, there are a lot of great options here in the sort of Carpentersville area. A lot of them are more centrally located in Elgin. But there are a lot of mental health centers that, mental health, in my mind, can also often take on physical characteristics as well. But, I don't question anybody if they tell me that they're going to the doctor for a physical. I don't question anybody if they're telling me that they're going for mental health treatment. It's the same thing. We need to be able to take care of ourselves. So you can always call up here to the department. I'd love to talk to you further about it if you have direct concerns, either about your children or about yourself, in sort of how to communicate and work together, because a lot of these social service agencies want to help you, okay? So there are also some crisis-based services. So here in King County, we have SAS, which is the Screening, Assessment, and Support Services. It's a 24-hour on-call service that will come to your house for minors in crisis needing intervention. It will only come for minors on state insurance, though. So that's also an option. Calling SAS out, there'll be a trained therapist who can come out and sort of help in the crisis situation, and then they provide up to 90 days of ongoing services for the youth and family to sort of work through these issues. Another crisis service is the Community Crisis Center. They have a crisis line 24 hours a day, someone that will answer and talk. They will not come out to your house, but they can talk to you through things. They can help make referrals to different community-based agencies. CCBYS is a comprehensive community youth-based services, and they will come out for, if either you lock your child out of the house, which I will tell you is a DCFS call, or for a child who refuses to come home. They will respond to a police department and help try and do a crisis intervention to get either the family reunited or get the youth somewhere safe to stay in the meantime. Okay, so this is my information. Please always feel free to reach out. If you don't know where to start, don't know what to do, please feel free to reach out to us here at the department. We're always more than willing to help and answer any questions that we can. Okay, thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.